Okay, good day, everybody. Welcome to Global Water Futures Annual Science Meeting. You are in parallel session 5. This is a focus on Indigenous co-creation and with a sub-theme today of governance and justice. Just a couple of quick housekeeping. You can put your questions that you may be thinking of as the panelists are presenting today in the question and answer box, and we will draw on those for the discussion at the end. Today we will be recording, and we've been trying to get archives up quickly on the Global Water Futures Annual Science Meeting website. So if you've missed anything from the last 2 days, you can find recordings there. You can listen to today in closed captioning, and you can turn that on by hitting the CC button in the toolbar at the bottom. And always, as always, feel free to engage in all of the discussion on our social media channels. Quickly, we are encouraging everybody to follow the code of conduct for this entire meeting. This is about creating a safe space for everybody to feel comfortable to share their stories and their experiences and their truth without fear doing that. And I know that everybody who's here today is certainly following all of those guidelines. So I will turn it over today to our session chair, Bev Jacobs. And I need to stop my screen share. There we go. And Bev is going to introduce the speakers for today. And I might ask that everybody who's not speaking turn off their camera and ensure that they're muted as well. Thanks.
Hi, Scano Sokwego, Giaso Gowenkise, and Gahaga and Yakawite. Greetings of peace to all of you. I'm chairing today's parallel session on Indigenous water governance and justice. I'm Mohawk from Six Nations Grand River Territory. I hold many hats. I'm a community member at Six Nations. I'm a lawyer by trade, and currently I'm the acting dean at the Faculty of Law, University of Windsor. So I'm able to take a couple of hours. I'm honored to chair this meeting today. So first I'd like to introduce our knowledge keeper, my clan mother, Mama Bear, as she will do the opening words today. She's a condoled Bear Clan mother for the Mohawk Nation. She's a trusted advisor for families and community youth and works closely with them in their homes and schools. She bestows traditional names in our longhouse ceremonies and provides spiritual counsel for all those seeking support. Through her work as a matrilineal leader and as a mother, she's a founding member of Ganungwe Council, a circle of Mohawk women working to reconstruct the power of their origins through education, empowerment, and trauma-informed approaches. Louise champions the philosophy of Ganistasala, our mother law, a natural law that binds Ongahoe, or Indigenous Kinship Society. She is the lead conductor of the Moon Lodge Society, a convening women and girls on a monthly basis in line with the full moon cycle. Louise is a principal organizer and leader of Ohilogo Under the Husk, a traditional rites of passage ceremony for Mohawk youth. And since 2005, she has guided hundreds of community families and volunteers through self-reflection and Haudenosaunee cultural instruction and ceremony. And currently, as a spirit-aligned legacy leader, Louise has presented at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and lectures regularly at universities throughout Canada and the United States on Haudenosaunee philosophies and self-determination regarding women. Louise, as I've said, is affectionately known as Mama Bear, is a distinguished scholar in Indigenous learning at McMaster University Institute, Innovation and Excellence in Teaching and Learning. So welcome, Mama Bear.
Sego, it's always good to see you, Beverly. Hope you're well. Sego's gonna go what kono hulado gwego ji wasquaja dala sene nua one his alade tanaya ski skana daidua nizalo headste. Tanagnegi wahi wat kadan halada negi agwegan hodagan loli huayatan is suguaya dizo. Negi wahi ne ungwe sua, kinistan hunja gajo sua, tanagwegan hodat ganyas gan hujage. Tanane oni itisota la duela skaelini gawalage yatisota asuntaneka galakwa chidoachia gyakeneka galakwa gaelini ogweda ge oji jiza tanaizani sugwa dizo ayaski skana atkahuitane na hodanua de doatala kwene ne galiwahele ne onega sua etoge ni duhakne ugwani gula. Greetings, one and all. I'm really honored to be part of this really important pivotal gathering. I think, there's no argument that life on Earth can't exist without the thing that we consider so precious, but yet take for granted. And part of Haudenosaunee philosophy is that we acknowledge in our ascension in all of creation is that we honor the people first, the earth second, and third is the water. And we acknowledge it in a way that says how fortunate we are that we can still find good drinking water to quench our thirst, and how fortunate it is that we can still use water to wash away what is bad in the world, and that the water is tied to the moon, that's tied to the women, that creates the vessel that our babies are born in, and our midwives pull from the spirit world. So water that oneganos, onegat goa, the great, or sometimes we call it onukwat goa, which is the great medicine. And as long as we have water in our lives, we will continue to exist. But if we take for granted the power of the water, then we cease to exist. And for my teachings in Haudenosaunee philosophy, the water is female. And here where I live in Akwesasne, we have to pay honor to the St. Lawrence River that I live nearby. And we have to treat it as a very powerful, powerful entity. And every year we have fatalities in our river, and the river will take the men but spit back out the women. So even the river understands the importance of female life in our daily rituals, and her importance. And that's why moon, earth, water is in Haudenosaunee philosophy very female-centered, very mother-centered. And we can't take for granted at all the preciousness of that. And when we begin to mistreat something in our lives, then it pulls back, and or it brings harm. So the other thing that I'm also aware of is that there once was a great flood upon this earth, and in our creation story, a woman fell from a celestial opening in the sky world, and she came here, and she brought with her seeds for a society that would bring a culture of cultivation and also our consciousness. So our sacred sky woman came here, and all she seen was the water, and she had to create earth in cooperation with a water world. And her story is so significant because in our ceremonial life, everything that we do replays itself from that original creation story of Ojit Jizo, our mature flower, our sacred sky woman. So as we move forward in this day and every day, we should always acknowledge before we take a drink of water, its preciousness, its importance, and its essential qualities necessary to life. And I know here in Akwesasne, we're going into our planting season, and we're kind of living in a drought. So every ounce of water becomes all that more essential to hang on to and not throw away. And growing up, I always heard the prophecy about one day we'll be buying our water. And when I was younger, that was unheard of because water was free and water was everywhere. But now it becomes more and more dire that we become desperate to find good, clean drinking water. And water holds memory. And if you don't, you yourself remember those original instructions, the water can bring you harm. So to wrap up this day, and I know I only got a few minutes, and it's hard to deliver an entire creation and life philosophy and culture within 10 minutes, but I'm really grateful for this moment to share these words and to hold ever so precious that Onukwa Goa, that great medicine that creation and creator gave us, and that we equate that with high reverence, acknowledgement, and that woman and water are one, because without either one, life ends. So, I acknowledge and am honored and give tremendous gratitude and nyawehas, thank yous to all of yous for, taking the time on this beautiful day to sit and listen to the importance of this message. So nyakoa tano gogo at kwana holadu ayaw skana na yotage got naguli eyes wahawage tana skasat stonsla yugwada ze tana ezoni na gonna look watsla. Itoget nyu doak na yugwani gula. Yaw.
Nyawa, Louise, for your powerful words. So I get the honor to chair this meeting and a few minutes to share some opening remarks. I just wanted to acknowledge the strength of our women and our knowledge, and Mama Bear is proof of that, to bring that knowledge to us here today. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work, to share just some of the work that we're doing. So I hope this will work for me. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Catherine. So my role, not only the chair of this meeting, but I'm the water governance lead for our Haudenosaunee project, which is Indigenous ecological knowledge training and co-creation of mixed method tools. So Louise had already talked about some of the principles of our laws, but the source of it is through what in English, what we call a constitution of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. and Guyana's Goa, the Great Law of Peace, is based on the principle of strength through through the story of the peacemaker. It's a legal, spiritual recital document, if you want to call it that. And it created a representative government of the Haudenosaunee peoples with checks and balances, and which has existed long before Canada and United States, long before their constitutions were ever in existence. And in 1987, the US Senate passed a resolution acknowledging the role of the Haudenosaunee in the development of the United States Constitution as a result of the Great Law. And the Haudenosaunee is representative of 5, and then later one other nation, the Tuscarora. So moving towards that peace. One of the different mnemonic devices or physical devices that demonstrated our laws was through the wampum belts. So they were made out of wampum shell, little tiny beads made into these wampum belts. They were either sewn on cloth or even animal hide. And some of these belts do still survive and are very powerful, complex symbols of our strength, as well as the complexities and the perseverance of Haudenosaunee peoples. And one of the wampum belts, the dish with one spoon, is an environmental stewardship best practice or guiding principles that was based on our relationship to the land and survival amongst each other as human beings. When we're talking about Indigenous water governance, we're also talking about self-determination, that we make decisions based on our laws. And we know that, in that relationship, there was a mutual understanding of our relationship with the early colonizers, the first one being the Dutch settlers, and that's with the Gaswenta, the Turo Wampum Treaty. And that established that first relationship and identifying and symbolizing our ways of life together. So the purple row symbolizes those two vessels traveling side by side on this river of life without interfering in each other's way of life. When you're talking about the rows, the purple rows themselves, is understanding that, the vessels, one being the ship, one being our canoe as Ongohoe people, and our laws are responsibilities to the natural world. And we talk about non-Indigenous laws, all of a sudden we do start talking about rights. So that's part of actually the work that I did with my PhD and looking at those two, and they're to work side by side. So if we're to talk about our responsibilities to our rights, then when we have those rights, we have responsibilities. So they're supposed to work together. And the 3 white rows symbolizes Haudenosaunee principles of Skana, peace, Galihuio, good mind, and Ganastasala, the strength. And this represented this collaboration of 2 worlds, 2 systems working together with that mutual respect. Next slide. So we talk about these core principles. our cultural legacies as Haudenosaunee peoples. When I talked about the Gaswenta, the myth of the earth grasper, the creation story, the great law, the Thanksgiving address, and the good word. These are all different cultural legacies of Haudenosaunee peoples. That is the backbone of our traditional laws. They are our traditional laws and ecological knowledge that provides an excellent foundation on which to build a culturally based environmental protection process. And also the ethical principles that, one second. That Haudenosaunee, our ethics, these are words actually in our language of understanding the inclusion of cosmology, our traditional laws, as well as the language, our integrity, honesty, respect, reciprocity, quality of life, protection of Indigenous knowledge, the acknowledgement of our traditional protocols, and that good intent that we have in everything that we do in the natural world and with each other as human beings. Also, with respect to Haudenosaunee sovereignty, that is even recognized within the Gaswenta relationship. This is an example, a quote from Ransom and Ettinger, that we describe some cooperative structures and processes that respect Haudenosaunee sovereignty and cultural identity while responding effectively to critical environmental problems. So some examples include, our examples is a regional organization representing traditional Haudenosaunee nations on environmental issues, an action plan for environmental restoration, a proposal to create culturally based environmental protection processes, and guidelines for environmental research in Haudenosaunee territories. So this enables us not only as being self-determined sovereign peoples, is also this integration of cultural and ethical principles based on Indigenous worldviews and cosmology. So this is the basis of our Indigenous water governance and justice. So thank you very much for the opportunities and background of the Indigenous program and to share that information with you. So now I would like to introduce our panelists for today, who are community and academic experts. So rather than introduce each one before they present, I'll introduce all of them. Diane Giroux, she's an Aboriginal Aquatic Resource and Oceans Management Coordinator at the Acacho Territory Government. And Corinne Schuster-Wallace, she is the Associate Professor, College of Arts and Science at the University of Saskatchewan. And they have a GWF project that's called Is Our Water Good to Drink? Water-related practices, perceptions, and traditional knowledge indicators for human health. And then we have Needy N. She's an adjunct professor at McMaster University and research fellow, United Nations University Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies. And she's also working on a GWF project with us with the Indigenous project that I just described. And then Erin Desjardins, who's from the Mattawa First Nations, and Kelly Munkittrick, I hope I pronounced that right, Kelly, who is a professor, Department of Biology at the University of Calgary. And their project, GWF project, is the Mattawa Water Futures, developing an Indigenous informed framework for watershed monitoring and stewardship. So first I'll call on Diane and Corrine to present now. Thank you, Yawa.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Diane Giroux. Thank you for the introduction. Corinne and I are going to be co-presenting this morning, and I'm just going to speak as a co-PI with as the Water Good to Drink project. Sorry, I stick my glasses on. I'm just going to be speaking to the background briefly of our project. As mentioned, I'm the Regional Aquatics Coordinator within Acacho Territory. We're located in the Northwest Territories. Our member First Nations are signatory to the Treaty Number 8 Adhesion of 1900, and we reside within the Great Save Lake watershed. So we have a lot of fresh water in our area, a lot of tributaries as well. So water is very important to us, to our people. And what has actually driven our project is concerns over water changes that are being seen by people in our communities, predominantly our elders, that are very, very concerned with the water quality and quantity as far as levels fluctuating up here in our region, and changes they've seen with the aquatic species like fish. So our program looks at research and monitoring. They're community-based projects, and over time we established a regional water monitoring program within Acacho, and to look at special areas, I guess, of the communities where they wanted to see what was happening with waters in those areas. So as a result of that, we were able to connect with Corinne Wallace with the University of Saskatchewan. And it's quite interesting because it was a Global Water Futures Forum. And we're actually, I spoke along with a few other First Nation member attendees in regards to our challenges with monitoring our water and accessing of resources to do that. Because our project was not really totally Western science-based, we wanted to look at the traditional knowledge components of what is being seen, as far as changes and what was happening in our ecosystems and within our watershed. So we started looking at, I guess, trying to support our First Nations with sort of setting up TK indicators with regards to water monitoring. And, fundamentally that came down to the question of, okay, well, how do you know, it's what has changed? What do we need to look for? And it was quite interesting because ultimately, it's very difficult to identify, specific items to monitor traditional knowledge. And our elders, have basically told us that you have to have that whole ecosystem or whole environment knowledge to be able to detect change. So in light of that, moving forward with our collaborative research approach with the U of S, with Corinne and the other team members, it was very critical as far as our relationship and because we're dealing with traditional knowledge, to, I guess, be very open as to the question. We did co-develop the project with First Nation members, which included our leadership, elders, our AB technical board representatives, elders, people that worked in the environment and with relation to health in the community. So it was very well-rounded. Our project was influenced by COVID. Unfortunately, we were to have some community sessions with the research team and our technical board, who are the lead members for the project in each community. Unfortunately, COVID didn't allow for that, and as far as it influencing our project, it slowed things down. As I mentioned earlier, for this type of project, especially involving traditional knowledge, the relationship between the academics and our communities is critical. There has to be trust. We wanted to ensure that the whole community was familiar with the project, that understood the intent, and also were educated that we had safeguards in place regarding the TK collected. And that's also reflected in the research agreement we developed over 2 years to confirm how those processes would be managed. And another key component of our project was also including elders and youth within the initiative. And we can, with the youth, they're sort of in a unique position where we are looking at training them. We are going to be utilizing them to collect the data once our surveys and questionnaires are completed by the communities. And so we're hoping that we will build capacity where the future research can be driven as well by this process. We're also strongly including elders. We're hoping to establish an elders panel to provide oversight to the traditional knowledge areas, specifically the analysis of the data that comes back as to why people feel that there's good environmental areas and there's areas that are not as good, that are becoming bad, I guess, and what that means. Just to close up, I guess, my comments, I would say that it's a very unique project for our region. It's the first regional research initiative driven by the member First Nations. Our communities have a lot of experience in regards to regulatory processes regarding development. And this is going to be fairly unique, where it's not speaking directly to resource decision making at this point, but it will be a driver for future research, and is very unique in regards to it being community driven. Thank you. And I apologize, I'm going to turn off my video. Our internet has been acting. Thank you.
I'd just like to add that I've never been so pleased to have sat at a table and had that serendipitous conversation about the work that myself and colleagues had been doing in Anishinaabe communities around the real costs of drinking water advisories, and sort of that conversation then about good to drink, safe to drink, and the drinking water advisories. And as Diane has said, this really is the type of project that turns things on its head from an academic perspective. And that means that it's not an easy path, because, for example, thinking back to Bev talking about the Indigenous cultural and ethical principles and approaches, and even as we've been going through the ethics approval processes and being able to recognize that informed consent from a university perspective doesn't equal the same informed consent from a community perspective necessarily, where you don't have to sign your name to say that absolutely you agree, and that by just showing up is actually you consenting to engage in an activity. And again, even with the funding processes and the agreements in place, communities have really been set up to really outsource the research, and universities have been set up to outsource their researchers. And so being able to turn that on its head and to say, actually, no, the research is being driven by the community and we're in a supporting role. And, so funds need to go to a Acacia Territory government to support the part of the research that they're driving. And then there'll be funds here for the graduate students engaging in the research as well. And just to try and sort all of that out, as Diane was indicating, it's a long journey, and it also is part of that trust building, that engagement, and that reciprocal relationship. And we are starting with the traditional knowledge, we're starting with the local knowledge. And so even my language around indicators to understand whether water is good to drink versus safe to drink, it's actually what we're looking at are the all my relations. And so we're trying to identify the all my relations for good to drink, to be able to then find and make space for that in the Western knowledge systems, if you will, because it's not good enough for us to be able to model the indicators that we use for safe to drink, the drinking water quality guidelines and standards. We need to be able to understand what drives water good to drink, and we need to be able to understand how that may change in the future under climate change and global environmental change more broadly. And so that's really what I wanted to just add to Diane's summary of the project, is that this really is a very different way of engaging, particularly from an academic perspective. And it's the way that we really need to go, as you've heard from Bev and from Dawn yesterday as well, in terms of what it means to be truly co-creating, to make space for both knowledge systems, and to be able to work together to build that trust to make a difference.
Thank you, Diane and Corinne, for your presentation. We'll go ahead and call on Needy for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. And as I'm planning to share my screen for a few slides as the background, I hope they're visible now. Just put them in a slide sharing. Okay, I hope it's working. Okay, so I would like to really thank Dawn for giving us the opportunity to be able to discuss some of the international water governance, environmental governance, and justice-oriented framings and concepts in the co-creation and Untitled project. And also Professor Jacobs, I mean, we used the law conference she had organized a couple of years ago to get feedback on how fitting are these international government instruments by the community members, Indigenous community members itself, through a special session that we organized. So with that background, let me give you an overview of these instruments that talk to environmental, water, and climate governance from a justice viewpoint. And they are making some head start to bring this agenda into international fora, especially in the United Nations meetings and documents and policies that are prescribed as towards setting minimum standards for survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous people around the world. First and foremost tool in that direction was UNREP, the United Nations Declaration for Rights of Indigenous People that was enforced in 2007, was a long history. The seed for this discussion started in 1985, and in 1994, the UN commissioned preparation of the draft of this declaration, and it took the global experts nearly 25 years to agree on something concrete that would make meaning, and that could be guiding and directional for ensuring harmonious and cooperative relations between the states and Indigenous people based on the same ethical principles that Bev had shared with us in her slides on justice, democracy, human rights, non-discrimination, and good faith. Well, this is, as I said, directional guiding, but this is not legally binding. And that's where some of the challenges lie. It outlines 46 articles 1 to 40, about the rights of Indigenous people and Indigenous individuals, and 41 to 46 about how to interpret these rights and how to put them in application or plug them into existing national and state policies or community-based planning and procedures through negotiation and harmonious discussion with the state. So the state here is also has a role in the mix. But let me, in the context of time, highlight the main message of Article 40, which talks about resolution of conflicts and disputes with the state and the indigenous communities, and to make a meaningful discourse. And when we talk about governance, and we have been discussing this in the co-creation Untitled project with Professor Jacobs, Dawn, and the whole team, to see how to actually have those local-based contextual content and best practices to make meaning for these internationally prescribed guidance tools. Take account of customs, traditions, rules, and legal systems, the state and the community. Well, there are other mechanisms, and before I go that, let me take a news clip, as you see on the screen, which was not long ago in April 2021, where in a Canadian news feed, the federal agencies are still talking about some of these settings or statements in UNRIP to see that is fully implemented and plugged. So it's a long journey, even after its implementation, which was in 2007 globally, but Canada took it into force around 2016 and started some discussions and work towards its implementation at the national scale. To help implement UNRIP, there are other mechanisms or platforms that United Nations agencies and system is providing. One is the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues that organizes its annual meetings every year in April. And this year in April, on the 20th session of the forum, 2021 was focusing on peace, justice, and strong institutions in line with the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda 16. So very much in accordance with the theme of our session today on governance and justice and how these framings will make meaning when we talk about policies and programs and interventions for specific communities and specific contexts. The other mechanisms that are available that is of interest in our discussion today is the expert mechanism on rights of Indigenous people, where a group of experts on Indigenous affairs would come together and evaluate how the opportunities or the challenges that communities or states might face in implementing international instruments like UNRIP. And again, a UN special rapporteur on rights of Indigenous people who would then take a summary of these notes coming from different indigenous communities about challenges, the opportunities they face in implementing environmental governance principles coming from these specific instruments in their own context. So reforms and refinements could be undertaken. So in general, from 2000 onwards, there has been increase in recognition of Indigenous rights in global environmental governance, climate change discussions. However, this progress is very uneven, and this varies within regions and among countries. A quick glimpse about on the permanent forum, and I think they are taking careful recognition about contemporary issues, and in some particular case, the matter of environmental justice, the disproportionate impact of environmental burdens in different communities, especially for Indigenous people around the world, the issue of climate justice. One interesting thing in this direction is how UNRIP is making its way forward into different UN agencies and how they're taking it or plugging it into their existing agenda. For example, UNESCO is adopted Article 29 from the declaration, taking a note of the rights to the conservation and protection of the environment. So very much in line with the discussion today. So Article 29 is been adopted by UNESCO in its strategy on Indigenous people. Then UN Habitat, another agency on the housing needs or habitation needs of Indigenous people, is come up with its own specific guideline and strategy the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is hosted by Canadian government and is in Montreal, headquartered in Montreal, has its own specific article in its strategic planning document, Article 8J, that talks about legislation and policies and to encourage and develop methods of cooperation and use of technologies, including a specific focus on incorporating or integration of indigenous and traditional technologies in ecosystem restoration, biodiversity protection, and in general, any planning at the state or community level that is directed to human well-being and conservation of nature. I might shift my direction to the FAO policy within the context of food security and production systems. And again, I'll point to the ethical principles that Professor Jacobs outlined in her presentation on self-determination, FPIC, participation and inclusion, collective rights, gender equality. So all this is pretty much noted in FAO's policy on indigenous and tribal people. So they are taking a careful note of the governance and the justice context that applies in such settings, and they're adding to a global voice on making these framings and these theoretical guidelines a reality, a working reality. Even very non-obvious institutions like World Bank has come up with their own strategy of investment, ethical investment in indigenous communities, dedicated financial allocations, ensuring that a part of their budget and programs and projects have a good representation on from indigenous projects and programs, and just sharing a YouTube link that elaborates on some of the ongoing programs. But the latest in this line is IPBS, the Intergenerational and Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. They've been working from 2014 onwards in their 5-year plan. First, they undertook a regional assessment of the Americas, where a specific section and chapter was dedicated to indigenous rights, environmental governance, and the nature connections that the communities share in terms of maintaining and sustaining biodiversity and ecosystem services. But that quickly transformed into a dedicated task force that contributed into developing the Global Assessment Report, a 3-year initiative that was launched in 2019 in the plenary in Paris. And a key statement, a key message from that report included that without meaningful participation and collective involvement of indigenous people around the world, we would never be able to save nature, because we've already lost millions of species, and there are only hotspots of biodiversity maintained and regulated by indigenous people around the world that still is hosting a rich resource of biodiversities and functional ecosystems. So a very meaningful and strong message out there from the Global Assessment Report. Coming back to our home ground and working with the co-creation project for last couple of years, we have noted that the media has taken a good cognizance of the issues on water and environmental governance in indigenous communities. We have been able to identify where the funding from the federal system and the federal agency is going towards designing plan of actions, designing strategies, or wastewater action plans, as you may see in the figure. So we try to just figure out how these funding in different years, and we still have to refine this diagram after 2012, is going on different kind of interventions. But I think it's high time that these prioritization process is done in a collective manner, where communities itself are able to then voice out that where they need this kind of investment, so that you can get an impact of each dollar invested. And I think, though it's bad news that we don't see this the government or the federal agenda of ensuring that by March 2021 all long-term drinking water advisories will be lifted. But we also have good news that we have projects now that are laying a meaningful roadmap on how best we can make this agenda a reality in the forthcoming future. And another thing which I found to be, as a closing, I found to be of interest was this proposal in the Parliament last year, the House of Commons in Canada, Bill C-230, that specifically talks about environmental racism. And when we talk about justice, environmental justice and governance, I think giving due focus on environmental racism, that is, again, to sum up in a simple format, is addressing disproportionate impact of environmental burdens on different communities. If we have to correct them, we need to also address them very clearly and in a transparent manner. And towards environmental racism is one such discourse in the mix. And this bill is at least trying to make a statement that the agencies and the decision makers have to be consulting all the communities, including Indigenous communities, on how they are impacted by this disproportionate impacts, and they have to collect information and statistics and data on different impacts, including health impacts. But we are yet to see how this will be all translated into action. And thank you. And I would leave you with this poster that our project is contributing to the event, which also outlines a methodology that is tested in different parts of the world. MEBA approach, multi-evidence approach. So if you have time, please go and have a look. Thank you, Noor.
Thank you, Didi, for that presentation, informative presentation. Next is Erin Desjardins.
Good afternoon, Good afternoon, everybody. I will be co-presenting with Dr. Kelly McKittrick, talking about the Matawa Water Futures project that we have going on. Thank you also for the introduction at the beginning of the session, very much appreciated. The Matawa Water Futures project has a number of components to it. Some of it leading in towards community research aspects of the program, but for purposes of today's discussion, I'm going to be talking about the Indigenous Informed Framework for watershed monitoring. Within Matawa First Nations, there are 9 communities that we have. 4 of them are remote communities, which are fly-in access only. Those communities are Webequay First Nation, Nibenomic First Nation, Niskandiga First Nation, and Yadmatang First Nation. The road access communities that we have as part of the tribal council are Arrowland First Nation, Constance Lake First Nation, Gadugaming First Nation, and Long Lake 58 First Nation. The Matawa Water Futures project was a partnership that was coordinated through Four Rivers Environmental Services Group, which is who I'm with. We provide environmental support services and programs to our communities, and we assist our communities in actively managing their lands and waters within their homelands by providing a community initiative support and capacity building through various ways, whether it be assisting with field work or helping out to provide other capacity through training in various aspects of the environmental monitoring world. So my name is Erin Desjardins, and I'm an intern with Four Rivers. My position was possible through the Matawa Water Futures project under the Greater Global Water Futures Initiative. And I am working alongside another intern. Her name is Jasmine Baxter. We are both Indigenous women who are undertaking these internships while also involved in academia. I myself am undertaking a graduate program looking at completing my master's, also under the guidance of Dr. Kelly McKittrick. And I'm looking at, I'll get into a little bit more about what my thesis is here later on. With myself, I come from more of an academic background. I've been in school most of my life, and so I'm coming into this learning more about the Indigenous knowledge side of everything. As I mentioned, I'm an Indigenous woman myself, but I never really had the opportunity to really understand who I am or where I come from until I really started getting more involved with this project, and also being able to work for my home community, which is Yadmatang First Nation. With Jasmine, she comes more from learning off of the land. She has incredible Indigenous knowledge. She's spent a lot of time on the land and learned the ways of our people. And so she is attempting, she's learning the academic world. So we've been fortunate to be able to work with each other to share our skills and share our knowledge on both sides to continue on with the initiative of the Untitled Futures Project. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, some things have been delayed and there's been limited community involvement. Typically, we would, be in the community, we would be having meetings face to face and, providing training and all sorts of kind of stuff like that. But we've moved to more of a virtual world as we are today right now. And we still have our community meetings, but we were also able to have quite a number of good meetings pre-pandemic, and we worked on a bunch of different concepts, which Kelly will get into here in a moment. One of the other things that we were able to accomplish over the past year was developing water stories, videos on water stories from our communities. And to help expand on those water videos, we also have a couple other funding applications that will also help to expand on our monitoring as well in the communities. And that funding is coming from DFO through their Indigenous Habitat and Participation Program, as well as the Great Lakes Local Action Fund. So those funding programs will help to increase monitoring and capacity building within our communities through a virtual world. But however, it'll still allow our communities to address any issues that may arise and to continue monitoring at priority areas that are within their homelands. We've held numerous workshops on designing watershed monitoring programs. We had meetings on community priorities that were a little bit more focused. So we'll get into these communities here in a moment. But primarily it focused on just two communities out of the 9. And that discussion came out of these meetings that we had prior to the pandemic. So there's 2 main programs that were developed based on concerns, one being in Yabatang First Nation and the other being in Constance Lake. So Constance Lake First Nation, the challenges that came about from discussions with the community were that they were actually terrified of the lake that was adjacent to the community. Historically, the lake used to be blue, pristine. Community members used to go swimming in it all the time. And then through different anthropogenic impacts, through forestry practices, and just numerous impacts to the lake, the community decided that the water was no longer good for them, and they decided to stop using it for traditional activities. So that's kind of where my thesis came from, was the concerns with the lake, and there's a lot of algal blooms that happen. So just talking with community members and figuring out, okay, what are your main concerns and what are you trying to accomplish? Out of getting data and information on the water, I was able to develop a thesis looking at freshwater mussels. So I'm using biomarker responses to determine quality of the water in the lake, as well as, help answer any concerns, with freshwater mussels. If they're present in a body of water, typically it means that the body of water is getting better or is in better health than expected, just because they're great little filter feeder creatures. And, a lot of people don't really know much about them, much like myself, until I really got involved with the project. I thought they were just little sessile beings that sat on the bottom of the lake and cut your feet if you stepped on them. But they actually, are a great steward of their environment. So I'm using that to help answer and address some of the concerns for that community. Through work with my thesis and work with the other monitoring programs that we've had with Yabatang First Nation and Constance Lake, we were able to bring community members out with us into the field and show them monitoring techniques, and show them how to take a water sample and all of the science stuff. But not only that, when you're on the land with community members, there's also that knowledge sharing on the other side. You get to have really great conversation. You get to really know your field partners, and you learn stories and traditions and teachings from the community members that you might not have really got to know just from sitting in an office, having a quick conversation or sending them a quick phone call and whatnot. So it was a really great learning experience. There was knowledge and skill sharing on both sides. And it was really great just to have that opportunity. So from these field training programs, we were able to develop some training documents for our communities. So we looked at water quality sampling, fish health assessment protocols, looking at benthics, and also developing some fish documents in terms of, like what are the aging structures of the fish, coming up with a bit of a quick survey to employ citizen science so that more community members can get involved and have fun with it. And it's been a really great opportunity in that sense. It's been challenging with COVID. However, it's challenged us to get creative in the ways that we interact with our community members. And then just a little bit more on training before I pass this over to Kelly. To build capacity within the Four Rivers staff as well as our community members, we took on a drone training program, but because of travel restrictions and not being able to get somebody to come and provide all the testing, there's multiple levels of testing required to get a drone license, especially for the advanced ticket. That's been put on hold right now. So hopefully in the near future, once everything gets figured out and restrictions start to ease up, then we can move on with the drone training and be able to use that to apply to our multiple programs that we have going on at Four Rivers. And also thanks to Kelly, we will be hosting a electrofishing certification. It's all online right now, but we're slowly working towards getting that done so that we can do some more teaching around fish and have a lesser impact on the waters as opposed to doing some netting programs.
Thanks, Erin. I wanted to talk a little bit about the second community project that we're involved with at Yamatong. The focus of the partnership with Four Rivers is coordinated by Terry Mitchell and Darren Thomas at Laurier. And the real focus is on supporting community interest to actively steer planning, monitoring, and stewardship initiatives in their homelands. The Matawa communities are facing industrial development in the near future. So it's really trying to help build the capacity to support community needs for environmental monitoring and to build programming responsive to the community priorities and Indigenous values in knowledge collection and water stewardship. So a little bit about the Yamatong work. When we met with the communities, Erin mentioned they identified their priorities. At Yamatong, the priority was trying to understand a winter fish kill that occasionally happens. And so a lot of the workshops that we had with communities were focusing on how to develop a monitoring program. Monitoring works really well for questions that are based on who, when, or where, but less well for questions that begin with how or why, which are more research-based. And so you need to build a foundation of information that grows out of monitoring programs. So we workshopped the winter fish kill at Tidy Lake to develop a number of simple, clear questions, some based on local knowledge and some to build future programming. And as Erin mentioned, we spent some time in the field with community members in the late summer of 2019, doing some training on water sampling, bug collecting, and fish sampling. And one of the things we wanted to do was understand the depth profiles of the lakes, because the winter fish kill was we thought probably due to lack of oxygen. I'm just going to show a quick picture here. This is the depth profile that we built for Tidy Lake. It's about 6.5 kilometers long. The clear spot in here is an island, but all the dark blue is water that is less than 1 meter deep, and the lighter blue is less than 2 meters deep. So the entire lake, 6.5 kilometers long and 1.5 kilometers wide, just has 3 tiny areas of deep water. And what we did was we used that definition of those areas to identify where to put some probes in over winter. And luckily the communities were able to go out without us and in the most recent year to do the work because of the restrictions. So it's been really valuable. Just to finish up here, some of the realities of conducting co-creation research with Indigenous communities. Aaron mentioned incredible local knowledge, ways of doing field work that are simple and effective, and local knowledge that's incredibly important to how we do the work. The most important lesson for me was to let the project take the direction it takes and try not to steer it. Really, we're trying to go a little bit past co-creation here and building the capacity for the communities to self-create monitoring. You have to develop meaningful relationships. Collaboration is hard. The pace of activities is different than Western scientists are used to, and life can get in the way. There's other real important uncontrollable things that disrupt planning or executions of plans. So you really need to look for ways to benefit people and to listen to what they're saying. And success for communities isn't about papers and posters and conferences. It's about building knowledge and success and building lasting relationships, building capacity and building self-sufficiency in terms of being able to ask good questions. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kelly and Aaron. So I have some time just to provide some brief remarks and just summarize some of the issues that have been presented in this panel. And again, thank you for all of your knowledge and the work that you are all doing in Indigenous communities. But one of the things that I've noticed is also that Indigenous women are taking the lead in our communities and to actively fight for our rights to water and justice. Also upholding our Indigenous knowledge and then using that to develop those positive relationships that Kelly just talked about, is respecting and being aware of those differences and, you know, building those knowledges and respecting those relationships. And going right back to what I had presented in the beginning about even the principles of the Gus Wenta relationship was about respect, the basis of it, and that peace and establishing those positive relationships. And also in reference to that self-determination, the governance by communities, and that they are active in ensuring that they are governing within their communities and protecting the knowledge, not only the knowledge, but also the practices in protecting the water. And also the controlling of the data in the community. I think that too is the respect also by non-Indigenous researchers who, in developing those relationships, has that kind of awareness of those differences, as also that Kelly had mentioned. And also we know that creating the data is key to governing water quality. So I want to again thank everybody. That's my remarks, but I think it's important to understand that the positive relationships and moving forward and developing water justice and you know, addressing the issues that we have in our communities for the future, and thinking about the future for everyone. So I want to also leave some time to have an open discussion. I know there were some questions already from the audience. So I think we can open it now for that discussion.
So I'm monitoring chat box and the Q&A, and we have a couple of questions that came in. We have about 15 minutes or so for some discussion. So if anybody who's listening does have another question, please feel free to still throw that into the Q&A function. One of the questions that we have is around kind of some of the policy barriers. So maybe talking a little bit about what are the major policy barriers to inclusion of Indigenous communities in governance, and if anybody has ideas about what those are, maybe there's a long list, and maybe any success stories of where some of that is being addressed. Does anybody want to take a first go at that question? Corinne.
Hello, everyone. I'm an immigrant with many privileges, so I'm not going to speak to the types of policies that could be required or that would work or not work. I'm going to leave that to others on the panel, but I will say that they're not enough. And Danica spoke this morning about building relationships, respecting traditional knowledge systems, and giving them the credibility that they deserve. And if voices aren't going to be heard and respected, then the policies aren't going to work. You can still marginalize marginalized groups, even when you bring them to a table. And this goes back to the power and privilege. And so we have to be able to hear and listen and respect what is being said, no matter who is saying it. And we need to be able to take that and walk together, as we've heard about the two-row wampum belt. And so that's the one side of it. And the other side of it is that these engagements can place burdens, particularly on marginalized groups and individuals. And so how we need to understand and ask ourselves how we can redress that to be more equitable. And I've got an example from some of the work that we've done with rural and remote and marginalized communities in East Africa. And a very enlightened Minister of Water and Environment put in place a policy that said that all of the community water committees in these rural communities had to have women's representation. And when she went to take a tour on the ground, she found that none of them had women on the boards. And when she asked around, it was because the women didn't have the time, the committees were meeting at the wrong time for them. It was right when they were looking after their families or having to cook their dinner or fetch the water, or all of these domestic roles and responsibilities that they had. And the second part of it was that they had no desire to go onto a committee where they knew that they weren't going to be listened to. And so it really is both sides of this. And so I just wanted to say that no matter what the solutions are, they can still be thwarted if those with power and privilege choose to do so. And so I would go back to what's been said about the importance of the relationships, the importance of active listening, and the importance of equity in all of these engagements.
Does anybody else have anything that they want to add to Corinne's comments? Another question that came in was around identifying some of the major challenges that the projects, the co-Is, have encountered and hopefully overcome in the co-creation projects. And I know Kelly kind of touched on a few, not necessarily calling them challenges, but some realities of the co-creation projects. But does anybody else want to share some of their learnings from working together and overcoming some differences in ways of working? And feel free to turn your camera up and unmute yourself to contribute. Thanks, Kelly.
I'll start if no one else will, and maybe Erin can chip in because she's more on the front line in trying to be a liaison between us Western scientists and the communities, and she has a foot in both camps. But special challenges during the pandemic, obviously, with Indigenous communities and being able to access and remote internet capabilities, be able to do remote meetings. and then, you know, just some of the life things that get in the way when there's limited space in some of these communities to be able to stay, and there's things like a community funeral or another type of sudden event where all the available space is taken up and all the available plane flight space is taken up. So just being able to adapt to those real life things that are happening and are much larger than the research project. So I don't know, Aaron, if you wanted to add anything in terms of some of the challenges.
Yeah, I think one of the things that some people don't realize either, and Kelly did allude to this when he was speaking earlier, is just the timing of everything and just letting projects happen as they happen. In the Western world, we're always so focused on deadlines and has to happen now, it has to happen this way. We wrote out this elaborate plan, and you know, this is my work plan and this is how it's going to go. And that's not necessarily how it always works, you know, especially when you're working with First Nation communities. You have to learn how to fly by the seat of your pants. And, you know, the outcomes of that are really great memories and really great experiences. And everything always just works out the way that it's meant to be, you know, how the creator wanted it to happen. And just everything will happen organically in that sense. And that's one of the messages that I wanted to send home was, you know, just it's hard to get out of that Western way of thinking with the deadlines and stuff like that. But if you can really slow yourself down and take yourself back and just kind of let it flow, you know, everything will work out the way that it's supposed to. And that's my piece on that. Thank you.
Thanks. I think this is a really good question and important one to discuss. And, you know, we don't learn how to do things better if we don't talk about how there have been failures or, you know, how to try and to do them differently. But maybe I'll call on Diane or Nidhi. Did either of you have anything in terms of challenges or success stories of overcoming those different ways of working that you wanted to share?
Sure, thanks, Stephanie. Maybe I'll share the word trust. So it was a long trust building exercise. It's not that we are researchers from the Western world and somebody's a research subject. So it's reorganizing your whole approach for interventions, for co-creation. And there is no blueprint for a co-creation process. It's learning as we go, and it could be very contextual, very specific to a particular community. And you may encounter failures, but that may teach you, or you may learn from them to outline a roadmap for success. So I think that was a big learning for all of us. And I think we built a beautiful relationship where we can understand similar terminologies, or we could create new if we didn't have a common ground. So I think all this was very healthy, and the evidence of that is the outputs that we have generated together, the events that we have conducted, the change that we are in the making. Thank you.
Diane, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just wanted to speak to, I guess, our particular partnership. It was interesting that, as we mentioned, you know, it was a community-driven question as far as concerns regarding what was happening with our water and in our environment. But initially, just, you know, getting the project going, it took a little bit of effort to, you know, have the community come to the full realization that it was our question that was being asked. And part of that, I guess, goes back to, you know, our previous relationships we've had with academic institutions where, and government, you know, where they come to us with a question that they want us to participate in versus us actually identifying what we want to address, and also developing the process on how the project would best proceed. In this case, you know, it does very, very strongly rely on that relationship that will be established fully with the research partners and with the communities, so that, you know, fundamentally there is respect, there is trust, and there's a shared understanding and a bit of education as well for the communities. Like I said, they've participated in past projects. In our region, we have the diamond mine, so and previously gold mine. So we're experienced in participating in regulatory processes, looking at, some form of TK study, but then there's always been sort of a hesitancy with TK because there's always an underlying concern in regards to consultation. So in our case, it's going to trigger, for one thing, the agreement itself and the ownership of the data and how it's handled. That took some doing to get over that hurdle because it being a regional project, we don't direct or dictate. Rather, we do get direction from our communities. So that was, I guess, our first major challenge in our project. But I think it's worth noting that the effort on both sides has to be in place to build that relationship. Thank you.
Thanks. And actually, that's a great segue into a question that was asked about sharing updates and information reports from these projects as those come in. And of course, the sharing of that information is decided on by the partners involved. But do any projects have mechanisms for sharing more broadly? I think Aaron and Kelly talked a little bit about some videos. Maybe we could throw a link to those if they're publicly available for anybody who's interested in kind of learning a little bit more. Do any other projects have ways or products that we can share outside of the projects?
So I just wanted to pop on quick and speak to the videos. They're currently in production, so we don't have anything developed just yet. I'm not a videographer myself, but I didn't realize how much effort it takes into actually putting, a decent 10-minute video together. However, that was one of the ways that, we got creative with still being able to provide training to communities. So the plan, once we're done with these videos, they're going to be talking about, different field monitoring techniques, how to use specialized pieces of equipment once the communities receive their own tech and stuff like that, is to put these videos together on a USB stick and send them to the communities. Kelly had mentioned, there's connectivity issues a lot of times, especially in the remote access communities and other communities who aren't necessarily right next to an urban center. So being able to provide them with a USB stick to play on a laptop right away is our way of hopefully avoiding the challenge of the connectivity issues and having them to still receive that training and then have a phone call conversation with us virtually if we're still not able to travel and everything is still restricted and stuff like that. So I'd have to find out about sharing those videos. Some of that might be community specific, based on what knowledge we incorporate in there and whatnot. But yeah, if we're able to, I can certainly reach out.
Great, thanks for that update.
Stephanie, I can share a little bit about the Indigenous project. We do have a website. I'll share the link here, or if somebody's there that can share the link to the website, because there is a lot of information. There's a YouTube channel, digital stories. Many of our young people have done a few digital, very powerful Indigenous stories from their perspective and the relationship to the water. And also the training tools that were used for the Indigenous project. So we'll put those links up on the chat.
Perfect, thank you. If you can throw those in the chat box for the folks who are interested in getting more information, that would be really helpful. We're close to the end, and I think those were the last of the questions that that we have. We did have a couple questions about work in the Great Lakes region, but we don't have any projects currently in this session working specifically in the Great Lakes. There's lots of other Great Lakes content in other sessions, and I'm sure there's ways of looking back to the recordings of archives if you've missed those sessions. So sorry about not being able to answer that specific question here. But Bev, would you like to make some closing remarks before we hit the closing time?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephanie. So yeah, I want to thank everyone for participating in today's session and for all of the work that you do in First Nations communities and the protection of water and you know, just to recognize also the I think one of the questions was about the differences, and even in academia, you know, the reason why I'm there is to show that we can work together despite differences. And when academia is requesting just a basic consent form that sometimes our elders, I think is disrespectful to ask them to do that. But I think this demonstrates that the respect is there, and that we have to do this together because we all live together. And we need to. So just want to thank everybody again, and thanks for asking me to chair today. And I'm happy that that today's session went really well. And I wish you all the best and look forward to hearing more in the future. So yeah, well, thank you.
Thanks, Bev. And I just want to do one quick housekeeping before everybody leaves. Just a reminder that the third and final session related to the co-creation of research with Indigenous communities will be tomorrow afternoon, the same time. So there's a link to that session within the Global Water Futures event page that you can find and join tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks. Ona.